Welcome to the Japanese beetle information session, and thanks for taking some time out of your evening to join us today. My name is Adriana Escobedo Land. I work with Samara Group, who's supporting Oregon Department of Agriculture on this project, and I'll be playing the moderator for today's webinar. I'm joined in person by Christopher Hedstrom, Eradication Project Coordinator with the Insect Pest Prevention and Management Program at the Oregon Department of Agriculture. We're joined remotely today by Curtis Cood, Environmental Public Surveillance Program Manager at the Oregon Health Authority. If you have any questions at all during the webinar, please ask them in the chat window, and we'll have time at the end of each section of the presentation to answer those, and an additional 30 minutes at the end of our presentation to answer any remaining questions you have. A recording of the webinar will be made available online at our project website following the webinar. If you'd like to view that recording or share it with others who might be interested, you can find that at www.japanesebeetlepdx.info. And with that, I'll pass the mic to Chris to talk more about the project and why we're here today.
Okay, so Japanese beetle is the subject today. I'm going to be giving an update on our eradication project thus far in the Washington County area, what we have done so far, where it's going, what our successes have been, and sort of what the threat of this pest is for those that aren't aware of it. Before I get started though, I want to make sure that people understand just how big a project this is. It's not just the Oregon Department of Agriculture that is working on this project. It's also Metro, Tualatin Hills Parks and Rec, Invasive Species Council, and all the different groups that you can see on this slide here. They're not even all on here. We have a lot of different partner agencies who are doing a lot to help us. Oregon Health Authority, who's joining us today for the webinar, is one of them. Cedar Mill News has been huge. We can't do this without the cooperation of many different partner agencies in Washington County and throughout Oregon. This is a pest that affects many different industries, from nursery to hops to grapes to all of Oregon's specialty crops, and in addition to being a nuisance pest for homeowners and affecting natural resources, schools, parks, you name it, Japanese beetle can be a huge, huge problem. So I want to thank our partner agencies for all the help they've given us for the past 3 years on this project. Today we'll be talking about what is Japanese beetle, why is it such a big issue, what does it mean specifically for Oregon, what is the Oregon Department of Agriculture, in addition to its partner agencies, doing to stop it, going over our eradication program. Are there public health risks, and what is the Celebrin G, the pesticide that we're using to eradicate Japanese beetle? And Curtis Cood from Oregon Health Authority will give a little bit of background about the public health side of things for Celebrin G. How does this affect residents? What can you do to help us eradicate Japanese beetle? What can you expect from the Department of Agriculture? And also, how can we stop it from spreading outside of Washington County? Like many living things, they're hard to contain. And so we have a yard debris quarantine in effect. So I'll be talking about the details of what that yard debris quarantine means for homeowners and for landscapers. So the star of the show tonight is the pest Japanese beetle. If you're not familiar with this pest, it's one of the major landscape pests, if not the major landscape pest in the eastern United States. It's a major pest of ornamental plants. So roses are a favorite, linden trees are a favorite, lots of ornamental grapes, and also wine grapes are a favorite host. The grubs will feed on turf grass while the adults feed on leaves. Can also be a pest of hops in Michigan and Minnesota. We're seeing that right now. If you lived in the eastern US, you've probably dealt with this pest. It's been in the United States since 1916. Oregon has been surveying and eradicating for the past 6 decades, starting with clean inspections in the 1960s and moving into mass trapping that I'll talk about throughout the state. The USDA estimates that $460 million, almost $500 million annually, are spent to control Japanese beetle in the US where it's established. And it's established almost all the way to the Dakotas. We estimate that if it was to establish in Oregon, we'd see about $45.5 million for the Oregon the cost to control it in our state alone. And that includes ag, nursery, and golf courses in terms of pesticide use and lost yield. But that doesn't include sort of things that we can't measure, like parks and schools and residences and the damage done to that, and also just a quality of life issue. The image here shows the adult beetle. It's pretty distinctive. We don't really have anything that looks exactly like Japanese beetle. It's a scarab, but you can tell it's Japanese beetle from these 5 white patches on the abdomen there. I can point them out with the pointer here. And then the grubs that live underground, most of their lives, about 9 months out of the year, is spent underground for Japanese beetle. Those grubs are where you see the damage to turf grass and other plants when they feed on the roots. But pictures say 1,000 words, so I'll show you some pictures of damage that you can expect to see if this thing was to establish in Oregon and in areas where it's established. So basically, these things will get together in the spring and summer. They'll get together, they'll defoliate and skeletonize leaves and just eat roses and other things down to the stem while mating. You can see this rose here is just covered in adult Japanese beetles. This is some skeletonization of wine grapes that's occurred in a homeowner's yard. They just feed on all of the green area, leaving just the stems and veins on those leaves, affecting plant health. The single beetle didn't do this damage here, but this is a close-up of a linden tree, a very popular street tree throughout the Willamette Valley that is a favorite of Japanese beetle adults. Just to show you how heavy this defoliation is, in the background there you have healthy trees that have not been fed on by JV, and in the front you have defoliation from Japanese beetle alone, just absolutely hitting every single leaf on that tree. What's interesting about this photo is taken by Mike Redding, and I believe this was from either Minnesota or Michigan, but in the area, this is actually just before fall. You can see some of the trees are starting to turn to their fall colors, but there are new leaves starting to leaf out at the top of the tree. So the tree was so confused about having no leaves, it was thinking it was spring, and it was affecting the physiology of the tree, where it started to put out a second flush of leaves as it was struggling to survive. But this picture here shows the damage that Japanese beetle larvae can inflict on golf courses and other turf grass. On the right, you can see the turf pulled back and all of those grubs that have been feeding on it. And this is the stage that we'll be targeting in our eradication, and I'll talk more about that. Just to give you an idea of how bad these things can be, in Oregon in the past throughout the time we've been trapping, we've probably caught about 40,000 beetles, but in the areas where they established, such as this picture from Minnesota, this is one trap that was designed, and it topped out at 40,000 beetles. So the populations can get absolutely enormous. This picture is from a guide showing how you can mass trap beetles in some areas using a floral bolus high on sex pheromone, and that's exactly the same trap that we use to, not the same trap, but the same lure that we use in Oregon. That trap was not enough with 40,000 beetles, so they actually developed a trap that could trap 1 million beetles throughout the season using a garbage can. So these things can be incredibly numerous, and just to talk about the quality of life issue, 40,000 beetles is a ton in one area and can do very, very heavy damage. This is a picture from one of those traps being emptied where it's a garbage bag full. That's probably the amount we've ever caught in Oregon, but that number could multiply very quickly if we're not able to eradicate. This is just to illustrate really how numerous these beetles can be in the destruction that they can do. So what does this mean specifically for Oregon? Well, number one, we'd see a decrease in the quality of life. There'd be damage to landscape plants, and we'd see parks, schools, and sports fields start dying off. There are already turf pests that can be controlled, but Japanese beetle are very hard to control in the areas where they're established. It'd be devastating to the nursery industry and to specialty crops. Nursery is our number one agricultural industry in Oregon, worth almost $1 billion. It's the number one at 900 million. We'd also see direct damage to grapes, hops, cannabis, and hemp, which are two huge burgeoning industries in Oregon, and also small fruits such as blueberries and others that could be damaged by Japanese beetle. The threat to water quality and natural resources, we'd see that just from defoliation and tree death along riparian areas, and other areas could be affected by water quality by the tree death in the area. In addition to an increase in the use of pesticides, not by just homeowners who might be spraying pesticides to control Japanese beetle in their yards, but industry has to be able to spray something because it's their livelihood. So there are things that are very destructive against Japanese beetle, and we would expect to see that use go up just for those businesses to stay in business, in addition to something called the Japanese beetle harmonization plan, where some plants to be exported out of the state have to be treated with pesticides to be able to be sold. So we would absolutely expect a huge spike in the use of pesticides, and broad spectrum ones at that. That would affect lots of other insects and also wildlife. So what if we fail? What if we are not able to eradicate this? Well, as I just mentioned, there's a thing called the National Plant Board Japanese Beetle Harmonization Plan. I won't go into what that means too much because it's a very specific set of rules. But essentially, the map on the bottom there shows how the states that deal with Japanese beetle and plant export out of the state interact with each other. So in the eastern area, you have category 3 states. Basically, those are infested with Japanese beetle. In the middle, with the yellow ones, you have ones that don't have huge populations of Japanese beetle, or they are newly established. In the red, those states tend to be JB free or have very small populations that are in the process of being eradicated, such as in Oregon and currently in Idaho as well, and also up in British Columbia. States that are green can accept Japanese beetle plants, but none of the others can. For any states to be able to export to any of the red or yellow states, you have to go through a huge amount of rules, a very restrictive way of growing plants, whether it's on impermeable impermeable surfaces, so the grubs can't move back and forth. There have to be pot diffs into and root diffs of pesticides into of plants into pesticides to kill the grubs. Lots and lots of rules that are going to cost nurseries tons of money if Japanese beetle establishes here. So we'd see an immediate restriction on what we can actually export to other states if you're not following those rules. It's also going to be a homeowner and landscape pest. We've already seen damage in some of those areas. And then long term, it would spread to other counties outside of Washington County. We'd see restrictions on exported goods that I mentioned from Oregon. There'd be damage in crop plots to specialty crops, and there'd be spread to other states. So it's important to understand that if we are not able to eradicate this, it would really be a huge game changer for industry and for homeowners in Oregon. So I'm going to take a minute to stop there to see if we have any questions specifically about what I've just talked about, and we can answer those. I see one question that just says, can't hear you, but hopefully we have remedied that at this point. Thank you, Harold. Arturo has one question here. Are there lookalike beetles? I think that's a good question. Let me jump back to the slide showing JD really fast. So in terms of lookalike beetles, there are other scarabs in the area. We have a number of scarabs in the state. The only other lookalikes that are close to Japanese beetle would be European chafer, which is newly established in British Columbia and Washington, and we do have a small population by the airport, but it is entirely brown, but it does superficially look sort of like Japanese beetle, but doesn't have the same metallic coloration. The other one that we've only detected once in twice in the state outside of the airport is Oriental beetle. That beetle also looks like, it is another exotic scarab, looks like Japanese beetle, but also doesn't have the same metallic coloration. It's sort of bone colored with a brown patterning on the elytra and the wing covers. So I think the other one that we've gotten some reports about where people think it's Japanese beetle is it's a chrysomelid, and it was released for St. John's wort for biocontrol. It's very, very dark green metallic and shows up sometimes in homeowner landscapes. But you'll see it a lot in Eastern Oregon. But when you see them side by side, they're very different looking. But we did get some reports of those in the area of people saying they're a Japanese beetle. So I think that's the closest one. We do have a lookalike guide available on the Japanese beetle pdx.info website that I'll show a link to that shows some of the common things that we might have that people think look just like them. So hopefully to answer your question. I'm going to jump back to where we were. So I'm going to go into some detail about the Japanese beetle program in Oregon, what we've done historically, and also what this eradication looks like, what our strategies are for actual eradication based on other states, and what we've done in the past. So like I said, we've been trapping for a number of decades to keep JB out of Oregon. And that's not just our state, that's also Washington, British Columbia, Idaho, Utah, California, and other states in the West that are working to keep this, this beetle out of the Western United States. Each year we put out literally thousands of traps in high traffic areas. The Port of Portland is one of them, but major cities as well: Bend, Portland, Corvallis, Eugene, Salem, all of these areas, high populations, and also the Port of Portland and major ports in Oregon get these traps that I've got a drawing of there on the right that contain a floral and a pheromone lure, and we look for Japanese beetle. The traps are incredibly effective at detecting Japanese beetle. We always find them at the airport. Air cargo is our most frequent pathway. I think we find them annually, every year, about a handful of beetles brought in on planes at the airport. We used to do airplane inspections directly, but just because of resources, we had stopped doing that for the past probably 15 years or so or more. But the traps around the airport do a good job of detection, and we'll treat the areas around the airport and have not had populations spread out of that area since we've been doing that. If we detect beetles, like I said, we eradicate. We have frequent eradications at PDX and at Swan Island, another major port. But we've had at least 3 large eradications since 1988. That includes one in K Junction in the 1990s, where we found about 160 beetles and treated down there, and another one in Tigard that happened prior to that. Still a handful of beetles, but eradicated. I believe that was in the 1980s. And then also the eradication that's going on currently in Washington County. These generally consist of ground and foliar treatments, a granular application of acelepryn, now that it's available. It's only been available since 2008. And also foliar treatments of Merit and Tempo, which are metocloprid and another product, but we have not done foliar treatments in the last 5 years, and those only occurred at the airport when the populations are larger than normal, but they've all been effective. So the current history of the eradication in Washington County goes back to 2016, where we detected 369 beetles. These circles are just illustrative. They for this slide. The other ones are more specific, but generally in the area, we found about 369 beetles in the Cedar Mill area. That was huge for us that year. In that year, we had detected the 369 was the same amount that we detected since the 1980s combined. It was more than that. So 369 doesn't sound maybe like a lot to some people, but for Oregon, that was a lot of beetles. And so the need to eradicate was huge. So we do a treatment boundary around that area, intending to treat all of those lawns with acelepryn G, and I'll talk about the product in a little bit. This consists of about 1,000 acres and 2,100 households. One of the challenges that we needed to get permission from every one of those residents to be able to treat, because of property rights and what we were doing, we needed written consent from each resident to be able to treat that area, and we were able to do it. It took, at that point, about a month and a half to get all of those areas treated. But in that area, the way our treatment works is that we target the grub stage. So when we put down a product like acelepryn in the spring, we don't expect to see an immediate result. We would expect to see results of that treatment the next year. And I'll talk a little bit about that and specify, but just when you see the next slide, I want to kind of preface it with what we were finding that year and what that meant. So even though we treated in 2017, the first year, our 2017 traps were not reflective of that treatment. We would be treating the offspring of that population, if that makes sense. I'll try to clarify that in a little bit. But in 2017, we found 23,000 beetles. And like I said, this wasn't a result of our treatment. Our treatment didn't affect this population. But what this meant was that we missed something that year before. The 23,000, the 300 did not turn into 23,000 in 1 year. Somehow we missed that population. It was much, much larger than we'd expected. And so one of the lucky things about this is that 90% of the beetles, or more than that, 97% of the beetles that we found were actually in our treatment area. So we'd expect to see a decrease in the population in 2018 based on our 2017 treatment. But based on these numbers, we knew we needed to expand the treatment area. And so in 2018, we did a second treatment of 2,000 acres and 5,800 households over 2 months in that area, and still put out traps to see what the 2017 treatment would look like. In 2017, we found 17,660 beetles in the same general area, which is good. We found less in that area, about the same amount of traps in that area, and a decrease in the population. So it's going the right direction. Specifically, in 2017, one measure you can use to compare, because we had generally the same amount of traps, but it's a wider area and the trap numbers differed. So a better measure to look at the effectiveness is to look at the beetles per trap caught. So in 2017, we found about 35 beetles per trap, and in 2018, maybe 23 beetles per trap. So that was a reduction of 34%. So we're going in the right direction. Our 2017 treatment did have an impact. And that year, we only treated lawns. In 2018, we treated lawns and ornamental planting beds, so a wider amount of habitat. So we expect to see that in 2019, when we treat, we would have a better impact on that population. 34% is good. I mean, reducing the population is good in any measure, but 34% is not what we expect to see. We expect to see twice as much as that. And so this next year, when we 2018, our results from the 2018 treatment will be sort of indicative as to how well the treatment's going. And in 2019, this treatment really needs to happen to continue the eradication project. Even though we only got 30%, by some measures that's not enough, we can't stop the project now because it's only one data point. We need to continue with the project to make sure that if next year we get 70% or 90% reduction, we didn't stop prematurely. We need to keep rolling. So at the end of 2019, with our 2019 rather, with our trapping numbers, we'll have a better idea of how the eradication is going. Just to summarize the 2018 ODA treatment, we treated 5,800 households, 6 schools, 4 parks, and 1 golf course. This yard is a little bit of an extreme. It was one of the larger yards that we treated, but the entire turf area and all those ornamental areas were treated. It took 2 months to do it, working Monday through Friday, but we were able to complete all 5,800 households. In 2019, our treatment area is expanding. It will be 3,000 acres and actually 8,500 households, which last year I think I was saying this treatment area will never get bigger. If we did, we lost, but I didn't know what I was talking about. It got bigger, but we haven't lost yet. We're going to continue to fight. In terms of consent gathering for this year, it's going pretty smoothly. We've been working for 16 days. And we've got about 30% response rate so far for consent to treat in 2019. So how did Japanese beetle get to Washington County? Well, it's not certain, but it's likely that it was brought with potted plants from an infested state. Even though we always see them at the airport being introduced through air cargo, Washington County, it's nowhere near there. And in all of our introductions in Cave Junction and in Oakland, Oregon, also, those we know were transported with potted plants from infested states. So it's important that things like, you see this, the stickers and the magnets say don't move firewood because of invasive boring beetles and other pests. It's also important not to move potted plants as a homeowner between states. Nurseries are able to do this, and professional nurseries can sell states and plants interstate, but they are inspected and treated for pests to prevent the spread of pests. This isn't the case for homeowners, and it's a really easy thing to do. A lot of people don't know that we don't have these pests throughout the country and bring their pests with them. And so we don't know for certain about Washington County, but all evidence points to an introduction by a resident. So in terms of eradication project methods, this is really to illustrate what we're doing for people that are new to the treatment area. We've got 3,000 new residents that have never been part of this before. So we want to make sure that they had all the information that was about how the process goes, why we're doing what we're doing, and what to expect on the day of treatment. So our target is Japanese beetle grubs, Japanese beetle adults. There are products that are available to manage them, but they generally don't do a good job of managing long term. However, if you attack their offspring and attack the grubs, that does go a long way because those aren't able to reproduce. You stop the next generation. In past eradications, always they target the grubs and they've been successful. Utah was able to finish eradicating a population just a few years ago, targeting the grubs with the celloprene, and Idaho is wrapping up a 5-year eradication project right now where their beetles were as high as 3,000 in some areas, and they were successful with targeting the grubs. The product that we use is called Acelepryn G. It's a granular product, which is what the G stands for. The active ingredient is chlorantraniliprole, and the reason we chose this product was because of its effectiveness against Japanese beetle, but also because of its track record for safety and its what we call non-target effects. I'll let Curtis talk a little bit about the health effects on the next slide, but just to give some background about how this product was chosen, before we started treatment back in 2017, we met with a scientific advisory panel in 2016 to talk to them about what are our options for a population like this, what can we treat with, what is going to have the least effect on human health, what is going to have the least effect on wildlife, what is going to have the least effect on pollinators, but really get the job done. And everybody said Acelepryn is really the product that you need to use. The location and how do we base it, how do we do our treatment maps? Basically, we look at where we caught beetles and we treat where we found them and also where they're predicted to be found. There are some guidelines that exist with a harmonization plan. Basically, if you have a trap and you go out 200 meters from there, you treat everything in that area to make sure that you hit all suitable Japanese beetle habitat. Preferred habitat tends to be lawns, which is what we're targeting, but also ornamental planting beds. We're not treating to anything edible. The product that we're using is not labeled to be treated for any edible products, so we're only treating what the label says. When are we treating? We're treating every year that we continue to find beetles. We're treating, originally this is a 5-year proposed project, but it has expanded from that original 369 beetles, obviously. So we expect this to be a multi-year project, possibly as many as 10 or more years at this point. We still only plan to do a single application of Acelepryn per year for most households. There's also a yard debris quarantine, which I'll talk about at the end of the talk today to illustrate sort of what we're doing to keep the beetle from spreading outside of Washington County. For most people, it requires no more effort, but there are some certain things that haulers need to do to make sure that it doesn't get spread, and they're aware of those, but also what landscapers need to do. Our overall goal is to reduce the annual Japanese beetle populations each year. It's not a one and done deal. It just doesn't work that way. But we're trying to bring down those populations a little bit each year and also preventing the spread to make sure that this gets eradicated. So right now I'm going to hand it over to Curtis Cood from Oregon Health Authority. And I'll give him a chance to talk about some health risks and concerns that people have had about Acelepryn G and chlorantraniliprole.
Thanks, Chris. This is Curtis Cood from Oregon Health Authority. And again, I'm Environmental Public Health Surveillance Manager at the Public Health Division of the Health Authority. What are the health risks of Acelepryn G? And first of all, what is Acelepryn G? Acelepryn G is a pesticide product that contains 0.2% chlorantraniliprole as its active ingredient. And chlorantraniliprole is classified by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, as a reduced risk pesticide. This means that chlorantraniliprole poses a lower risk to human health and the environment than other pesticides allowed for the same uses. The harm that a pesticide can cause humans and animals is known as toxicity. EPA has determined that Acelepryn G falls into a low toxicity category by all routes of exposure. Right? And eating, breathing, skin, and eye contact are all considered exposure routes. So this means that, unlike with many other pesticides, EPA does not require Acelepryn G to have a signal word, either danger, warning, or caution, on its package. So one of the questions that I get a lot is how might I, my children, or my pets be exposed to chlorantraniliprole? Well, first of all, direct exposure, inhaling, swallowing, or experiencing contact on the skin or eyes to chlorantraniliprole is unlikely. The application procedure from EPA requires that the Acelepryn G granules be watered into the ground immediately after they're applied. Water causes the granules to break down and become absorbed by the surrounding soil. And as Chris already mentioned, no spray mist will occur with the application of Acelepryn G. So, can chlorantraniliprole make people sick? Well, it's unlikely that even direct exposure to chlorantraniliprole, when used according to directions on the acelepryn G's label, will result in poor health effects or bad outcomes to humans or animals. Back in 2014, EPA determined with reasonable certainty that no harm will result to the general population or to infants and children from exposure to chlorantraniliprole residues. EPA reaffirmed this in 2016, and they determined that no harm is expected from exposure to chlorantraniliprole from skin contact or by incidental ingestion by children or toddlers over the short and midterm. In fact, to exceed EPA's maximum acceptable daily dose for chlorantraniliprole, a toddler would need to eat more than 4 pounds of treated soil each day. What about the use of acelepryn G near gardens? Well, chlorantraniliprole, again, it's categorized by EPA as a reduced risk pesticide when used on turf, as it has low impact on human health and on the health of non-target organisms like birds, fish, and plants. EPA has allowed chlorantraniliprole to be registered for use on food crops such as peaches, plums, and artichokes. And based on EPA's assessment of these food uses, the risk to the general population from consumption of home garden fruits and vegetables near acelepryn G applications is expected to be hundreds to thousands of times below any level of concern. When acelepryn G is applied only to turf, ground cover, and ornamental plants, it is unlikely that chlorantraniliprole would be found on fruits and vegetables. And I want to stress again, ODA will not be applying acelepryn to places where small edible food plants are grown. So if standing water is present or rainfall is heavy, application will be rescheduled to avoid potential runoff. That's important because if water is flowing over the ground soon after application, that can move some of the pesticide to unexpected areas, such as your garden. And once there, chlorantraniliprole can be taken up by plants. And the National Pesticide Information Center has guidance on minimizing pesticide residues in food. So again, if there is standing water present or there's heavy rainfall is forecasted, then application will be rescheduled to avoid that potential runoff. More information can be found at oda.fyi/jbhealth. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you very much, Curtis, for giving us that information and for stressing also that we want to be applying to acelepryn to places where edible food plants are grown. That's probably the #1 question that I get from residents, other than questions about pets. Last year, I think overall, overwhelmingly, is what is this going to do to my pets and what is this going to do to the food? In the time that we've applied acelepryn G in the last 2 years, we've had no reported complaints about health issues from anywhere that pets might have been in the area. We do ask that pets are not present during application, not because of the pet safety. I mean, slightly because I don't think there's any risk to pets or a very reduced risk. But more for the safety of our crew, because if we go to a backyard and there's a dog present, we don't know what the dog's going to do. And then the other question we get is, how do we know that we're not going to be applying it to garden areas if you're spraying this? Well, it's not sprayed, it's broadcast because it's a solid or a granular. And we do have control over where we place it, even with using things like belly grinders and these other applicators. We make sure that we don't apply in that area. We give a buffer around the gardens as well. And I'll talk a little bit about that on what to expect on the day of application. So what to expect in terms of treatment application? How does this work? How do you guys come out and do this? Is it just, we go out and we apply it if we say yes, or what happens? Well, if you return your consent form, which is critical to our project, is that we get not necessarily yes or no or medical exemption for everybody, but we need a response, just so we know that we've reached out to residents and heard from you about what your answer was. That's the most critical thing, is returning the consent form. If you've consented to treatment by the Oregon Department of Agriculture, we contact you at least 3 days prior to the date of treatment. Last year, I think every Thursday, I sent an email or a text message or a robocall out to everyone that we plan on treating the next week. So at least 72 days in advance. And then on that date, so if I let you know that we'd be there, Tuesday, ODA will visit your residence between 8 and 5 p.m. We don't know what date, what time specifically. Usually we're done by about 3 p.m., so it doesn't go as late as 5 p.m. We also don't want to be in the way if kids are getting out of school, so we're usually done by about 2:30. But ODA will visit your home, and they'll be accompanied by 1 or 2 applicators from General Tree Service. That's our contracted applicator. They're licensed pesticide applicators, and they're able to actually do the application. An ODA team member knocks on the door and answers any questions that residents might have. It is not necessary that people have to be home for treatment, but if they are home and do have concerns, they'll be able to have their questions answered before we start doing anything. As part of the consent form process, homeowners have the option or the ability to enter comments about their yard. So if they have a garden that they want us to avoid, have pets that we should be aware of, or any other things like their gates are normally locked, or to call them, or anything else they think we should know about, they can enter those comments in the consent form online or write them directly on the paper consent form. And then on the day of application, our ODA crew leads who are out there's about 5 teams that work every day, actually have access to every single comment left for every household that we're treating before they even go to the door. They can see those comments. So last year we had a warning about a skunk in the area. That was very useful to see because it alerted us to potentially a danger in the area. But knowing about dogs and things like that is also nice. So we'll see those comments and we'll be able to answer those questions. Once we've answered questions, talk to the homeowner, the team member checks the yards for any hazards like dogs that may have been left outside or areas to avoid, such as gardens or if the lawn's too wet. As Curtis mentioned, if the lawn is saturated, if there's standing water, if it is pouring rain that day and we can see that there is water pooling, or there's a risk of runoff into either gardens or into waterways, we can't treat that day. It is against the law. And so we will reschedule, we will not treat. And we'll reschedule for later in the year, probably in the next few weeks, to make sure that area is dried out. This year it might not be a problem because it's been so dry. The first year we had a lot of rain. The second year it went pretty smoothly. We also review comments or instructions from residents, as I said. Once it's determined that we can go ahead with the application, we give the okay to applicators who apply the aceleprint to the areas specified. If there are areas to avoid, such as koi ponds or gardens or any edible plants, they take great care to avoid those areas. One of the ways they do this is if they're wearing a belly grinder, which is basically it's an application tool that allows the granulars to be spread out from just like a wearable applicator. They can put their back to a koi pond, take a step forward from it, and then apply the product. That way it's only being broadcast in front of them and not behind them. There's no risk of the product actually getting into the pond behind them. They do the same thing with sidewalks and with gardens. So they're only applying away from that actual area, and that works very well. If homeowners prefer to be there for the application to supervise it, we welcome that. Absolutely want to make sure that this is done with complete transparency. We're not trying to get away with anything. We're just trying to eradicate the beetle in the safest way and the most effective way possible. And then once application is complete, we leave a note on the door. It's just a small sticky note that says we came by. It's indicating the property is treated or if it wasn't, and then with some follow-up instructions about watering in the product. It's very important that aceleprint is watered in. That's part of its application instructions, is that after aceleprint G is put on, you have to water the sprinkler or run the sprinkler for 10 to 15 minutes, and we're asking residents to do that. That makes sure the granules dissolve into the ground and get where they need to be, where they're fed on by Japanese beetle larvae. Most residents take about 5 minutes or less from start to finish, and treatment's just once per year. I think a lot of people that were concerned about the treatment last year and us moving into the area and doing these applications were concerned that it would be this all-day thing and that it would be this very involved. And then when we were there for maybe 2 to 3 minutes, got their yard done, and were on their way for the entire year, they were really surprised about just how fast it was. If we can't treat for some reason, like if it's too wet or the gate's locked or there's pets left outside, we leave that same Post-it note on the door, but we just check the box that says we weren't able to treat. Write a note on there saying why, and then we'll follow up with information about rescheduling. It still has all our contact info. If people have questions, they give us a call, and we can figure out what the reason was, because we note it down on our own records as well. Again, I'm going to reiterate that we ask residents to run their sprinklers or water the area for 10 to 15 minutes on the day of application. If it's raining that day, it's unnecessary. There is a point where we can still, if it's drizzling or if it's a light rain, that's ideal for application, because it's not going to run off, but it gets watered into the ground right away. If it's pouring, we stop and we make that call from day to day and from yard to yard, honestly. But if it's raining on the same day, you don't need to run the sprinklers. And then again, please have your pets inside. And when we alert you that we're going to be there on a certain day, it's critical that pets are inside and that gates are unlocked so that we can get the application done quickly and efficiently. We have 8,500 residences to do. And last year we spent about 2 weeks alone on just the rescheduled properties, not because of rain, but because of locked gates and pets that we had to go back to. It takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. And honestly, those are tax dollars being spent unnecessarily if the gate was just unlocked. So really pushing that this year to be able to help us out with that. So the other big part of this about how residents can cooperate with this project is the yard debris quarantine. And this is a little bit harder to understand what's going on, but it doesn't take that much effort to help and cooperate. So to prevent the spread of Japanese beetle, a quarantine has been set up to limit to spread possibly contaminated yard debris. In a lot of neighborhoods, when the yard debris is collected from the city in the city curbside bins, it goes and it's destroyed or turned into compost and then resold as compost or sold as wood chips and reused. But if it's got Japanese beetle in it and it's taken to lots of different transfer stations and there's larvae in there or adults in there, it can really spread this pest very quickly and gives the potential to spread it outside of the area so fast that we won't ever be able to eradicate. And like I said, that threat is very real. JB was moved into the area by residents and potted plants from out of state. If these things can survive a trip across the country, they can certainly survive a trip across the county. We also know that Japanese beetle tend to be, because grass is such a preferred habitat, they can be attracted to grass clippings in some areas. So JB larvae can be moved in soil as well, and they can be moved with grass clippings, and adults can be moved with grass clippings and foliar trimmings. This quarantine also applies to things like plant sales by garden clubs. There was just a very good publication put out by Gail Langolato of the Oregon State Master Gardeners on specifically Master Gardener plant sales and best management practices, but really can be applied to any plant sale to make sure that not just Japanese beetles being spread, but other pests in the state as well. This is a map that I don't expect you to grasp right away, but this just shows that the yard debris quarantine affects the main area of our treatment. This is our proposed treatment area for 2019. All of those dots in the map are areas where we found Japanese beetle, but only the main area in the middle is part of the yard debris quarantine. Those smaller areas in the periphery are not technically part of the quarantine. Certainly if you had large loads that you needed to dispose of with the quarantine rules that I'll talk about in a moment, we would not fault you for going to those areas, but the risk is really that central area. Those peripheral areas in just blue on the south and sort of southeast, southwest, and direct south sides. Although we detected beetles there, those are in the 1s and 2s. In the other areas in that main area, they're in the 10s and in some cases hundreds. You can go to a map at japanesebeetlepdx.info, enter your address and see that area and see if you're part of the treatment area or if you're part of the quarantine, that main area. So what does this yard debris quarantine include? Well, it's mostly the things that we're concerned about primarily are grass clippings, plants with roots or soil attached because they might have grubs, sod or removed turf grass because it's going to be attractive to the beetles, but also may have Japanese beetle larvae in it depending on the time of year, or eggs. Growing media, so potted soil from raised beds or potted plants. If a company is a huge excavation or you've taken out, you're digging for a pool or putting in something, a new addition, you've taken out a lot of fill dirt, that's not necessary. We're not going to find JB in the deep parts of this. This is really just a surface dwelling grub. It can be part of compost. If you've home composted, you may have moved beetles into there with that yard debris. Bulbs or tubers of ornamental plants often have are attractive to grubs to feed on, but also may have soil attached to them that may have eggs. And then mixed loads containing any of the above material. So we don't want mixed loads of non-plant material going to our drop-off site, but if they are mixed loads of, I have a lot of branches and things like that, but I also have grass clippings. Yeah, throw those in the green bin and or take them to Northwest Landscape Services. So the quarantine means that all quarantine yard debris must either be left within the quarantine. So if you're doing, if you have a compost pile in your yard and you use that compost or use that yard debris, it doesn't need to go anywhere. You can just leave it on site. That's probably the easiest thing to do. The other easy thing to do is put it in your standard curbside yard waste bins. You don't have to do anything special at that point. Walker Garbage, Waste Management, and Pride all know what to do and know about the yard debris quarantine. So anything anyone in the quarantine puts into those curbside bins is automatically being taken care of and being dumped at Hillsborough landfill so that it doesn't get spread into the normal yard debris pathways or processes. If something doesn't fit into standard curbside bins or it's done by a landscaper and taken off site, we're requesting that that's taken to Northwest Landscape Services in Hillsborough. That's just during the spring and summer from April to October. Details about that are also on the Japanese Beetle PDX website. That's when the above options are not available. That is also collected and then daily taken over to Hillsborough landfill for deep burial to make sure the beetles aren't spreading. The first year we did see more beetles at Northwest Landscape Services, which is sort of proof of concept that the beetles were being spread in yard debris. Last year we didn't detect any new beetles at the landfill or at any of the other transfer stations that are not allowed to accept yard debris, so places other than Northwest Landscape Services, meaning that I don't know what that means. It's either not being spread in yard debris or it's working very, very well. So we're still monitoring those areas to look for the spread, but we're not seeing a huge spread of JB. So we think we're helping curb the spread a little bit. But for homeowners who have questions, the main thing is put your standard curbside yard waste bins, just put the debris in there. That's the easiest thing you can do. It doesn't really change anything. It does change the ultimate destiny of that yard debris, but really helps us to stop the spread of beetles. What else can you do to help? Well, the main thing you can do if you live in the treatment area is return your consent form. That's the biggest thing, and that's the biggest challenge. It's not the biggest challenge of this. The biggest challenge is eradicating the beetles, but one of the main challenges of this eradication is just getting a response from the homeowners so that we can do the treatment as planned. To be successful, we must treat everywhere that we can possibly treat in the area that is suitable habitat for this beetle. We're trying to get the population to 0. We're not just trying to diminish it. We're not trying to manage it. We need all the beetles gone. So you can return your consent form along with contact info to receive key updates and notifications. That's so we know how to reach out to you to tell you about treatment. And like I said, so far in 2019, over 2,400 residences. Right before the webinar tonight, I checked 2,457 out of the 8,500 needed have returned their consent forms. So that's a huge amount of support from the community. And this project really, the success of this is based on the community cooperation. And that's in just 2 weeks, but we really need them all. Comply with the quarantine, use the curbside bin. That's going to really prevent the spread and help us to reduce the populations in that area. If it spreads more than that, it just won't be feasible to treat all that area. Alert your landscapers about the quarantine and let us know your landscaping company so we can also reach out to them directly. You can tell your landscaper, but if they work for a larger company, the word might not get out to everybody about the quarantine in the area. So we've been contacting them directly. There are thousands, literally, of landscapers in the treatment area, so the more information we have, the better. Stay informed. What else can you do? Just keep up to date on Japanese Beetle PDX. We put PIRA updates up there just for major parts of the project and where we're at. The latest info can always be found there at that website. And then also just do not bring new pests into Oregon. This is wider than just Japanese beetle, but don't move potted plants. If you leave the state with something and there's a chance of bringing new pests into the state, wash it or just don't bring it with you. There are many pathways for invasive species to get into the state that threaten Oregon in all sorts of ways. So just being aware of those pathways is really huge. The Oregon Invasive Species Council has a lot of information about that, as does the Oregon Department of Forestry. So reaching out to those groups or their websites is a good way to find out about invasive species in Oregon. And then this says stay informed again. The other thing to do is educate others in your network. Distribute project materials. If you have a newsletter or your homeowners association or a garden club, as one of our attendees tonight, Harold Shannon has been huge with helping us to get the word out with Aloha Garden Club in the past couple of years. Distributing information, having me come out and do a talk about what's going on and what ODA does, not just Japanese beetle, but in terms of all invasive species or the invasive species we can protect against. Let us know how we can provide updates or what we can do to get the word out, because we really appreciate people helping us spread the word. We're limited in what we can do and the reach we can have. And if the community reaches out to its own constituents, or if clubs reach out to their own members and neighborhoods and homeowners associations reach out to their own residents, that can go a lot further than me from the government coming in and telling them what's what and what they should be doing to help us. So we really rely on that help from different groups. So that concludes everything for tonight that I wanted to talk about, but I want to be able to answer questions. And I also want to really extend my sincere thanks to the residents of Washington County and to all the different groups that have helped us with this project. I've been on this project for 3 years now. This is going to be our third year of treatment. And I'm always really shocked at the amount of help that people are willing to give and how much they want to get involved with this project to really stop this beetle. It really will have a huge impact on a number of different industries in the state. But really, we can't do it without the help of everyone in the community. Just getting consent forms back, talking to the neighbors, answering questions, getting in contact with us, and the support and information that people like Curtis have given us, THPRD sending it to their constituents, Metro and Washington County with all of the yard debris quarantine that they've been working with, Virginia Bruce and the Cedar Mill News, and really all the cooperation from these groups. So thank you very much, and thanks for your attention tonight. So I have one question from Arturo. Do you happen to know what is the ratio of beetles caught in the traps that haven't been caught? Have the beetles in the traps caught in the traps, have they laid eggs? That is a good question. Basically, how effective are the traps? We don't know specifically what that is. I would love to know how effective the traps are. I know that they are incredibly effective in the US, and some people actually use the same types of traps as mass trapping. There have been some studies into that. So we may actually be doing that with our traps in addition to treating, also mass trapping. We've done a couple of follow-up digs to see what kind of grub populations we can find in the off-season. Jessica Rendon, one of our entomologists at the Oregon Department of Agriculture, who's heavily involved in this project, she's been going out and looking for grubs and has not recovered any Japanese beetle grubs in the area. But we haven't done any extensive digging because they tend to live in people's lawns, and we don't want to cause more damage in that area. But we're still looking for this, and we should be able to find some mature grubs, but have not detected any yet. So limited studies, but also sort of limited knowledge in terms of what the ratio is. So hopefully that answers that question. Potentially, I think that the beetles caught in the traps have laid eggs. I think there's always a risk of that. But because it is also a sex attractant, it could be that some of these beetles are attracted to the traps before they've actually made it. I think that's what we're really hoping is the case. But without dissecting some of the beetles and sort of knowing that much, I don't know how we get that number. And unfortunately, I think we don't have the resources to do that at this time.
So follow up in that vein, Harold has a question here for you, Chris, about if there's been any issues securing funding to complete the project.
Oh, good question. So he was asking if there's problems with funding with the project. Currently, we are funded through 2019. We'll be able to do the treatment for that. In subsequent years, we basically need to go to the legislation to show why we need the funding to continue the project. The project's entirely funded by the state of Oregon currently. In the past, it has been partially funded by the Oregon Association of Nurseries, but each year we request emergency board funds from the state to fund the eradication, and that comes from lottery funds. So right now, lottery funds are pretty good. I know they had a booming year, and so we should be okay, is what we've been indicated for the next few years, should the project continue. But at least for 2019, we do have the resources we need. We're bringing on more staff this year for the eradication specifically, which I'm excited about. Having a dedicated staff for this is going to be really good for the efficiency of getting these treated. But funding right now is okay, but it is something that we need to request from the legislature for e-board funding each year. Thanks for listening to me talk about Japanese beetle for an hour. I appreciate your attention and joining us for the webinar this evening. Thanks very much to Curtis Food for joining us for Oregon Health Authority. If you do have specific questions about acelepryn, not acelepryn specifically how it works, but health risks of that product, go to the oda.fyi/JB health, or go to JapaneseBeetlePDX.info, always for the latest info and for links there. I encourage you also, if people have questions in your groups, this webcast will be made available on that website. So it really covers a lot of the project that we're working on. So we'll have that available. But also tell them to reach out to me. I love answering questions about this. I get questions about it daily. And so I think it goes a long way to be able to talk to the residents about this directly and have their questions answered by the people directly involved with it and not just being sent down a phone tree. I hear that over and over again. So I encourage you to send the residents to ODA to talk to us about these questions and get them answered. So again, thank you very much. I'm going to sign off now, but if there's more, reach out and contact me at my email or feel free to give me a call. So thanks again.